welcome to our Path to Progress webinar series, episode 8. Today's topic is a very intriguing and interesting one. It's constituents of an effective performance management system. With me today is Mr. Vincent Bouw, who is the former HR director for Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi, UAE. He's been there. He was there for more than 6+ years. He's also been the HR director at the Coca-Cola company. Been there for, I think, more than 5 years, and of course carries a very elaborated career, which we will let him describe in his own words. But Vincent, I'd like to welcome you to the webinar today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Myself, I am Shahrukh Mirza, Regional Head HR Consultancy, People Perfect Worldwide, and your host today. So let's just go ahead and quickly introduce ourselves. Myself, I've just crossed about 3 decades in the HR field. I come with an organizational HR degree from the University of North Texas back in the day from the US. And then I started my career actually with People Perfect Worldwide as well. It's been a long journey, but I've certainly been around in between in various geographies and countries as in various HR roles. While I was in the UAE as a head of HR for Habib Bank AG Zurich, I was able to also get certified with the reward team for Corn Ferry Hay under the able leadership of Dr. Mark Eaton, who was the managing director of Middle East. So yeah, we've done a lot of performance-related and compensation-related projects and reward work over the years, and that's also related to today's topic. That's I think all about me. Let me turn it to Vincent. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career.
Thank you. Again, thank you for having me. So yeah, my name is Vincent. I'm originally from the Netherlands. Probably have a career now also roughly 30 years. Although I grew up on the business side, so spent about 10 years in IBM in the global services division there. And then I started my international career. So I moved to Southeast Asia, was in Malaysia for 14 years. Then I moved to HR consulting for about 8-9 years as self-employed, worked across, I guess, Asia, you say, with various customers. Then joined, like you said, Coca-Cola as the regional head for, ODL, talent, learning, culture. And then most recently, for the last 6 years, here in the UAE, with most recently Cleveland Clinic as one of the HR directors. So yeah, that's in a nutshell me. So we have a very interesting topic today, I think.
Yes, indeed we do. And I think between you and I, 60 years of experience in HR, we should try to attempt to help our audience clarify some questions on this wonderful topic of performance management. Now, most companies understand that the key method of attaining and maintaining performance excellence in an organization, of course, lies in the proper setting or planning, I should say, monitoring and appraisal. Feedback mechanism of individual employee performance and goals. Therefore, it is paramount to first clarify our role's performance objectives, the what's, as we call them, and then the role's behavioral expectations or competencies, the how's, required to successfully meet and exceed the role expectations. Of course, collectively, when an individual performs and his team performs, the department's objectives are also on the rise. And they're all linked with the overall corporate objectives of the organization. So as far as the constituents of an effective performance management system are concerned, I just mentioned this is the typical performance management cycle steps. However, it is also equally important to understand, once we achieve the transparency in a performance management system, that it would also be linked with the performance rewards. And we're going to have a question or two on that as well. So let me just go straight into it. Our first question is for you, Vincent. What is the best way to align and cascade organizational performance goals to the employee performance goals, being smart? and a best fit in terms of the job description and role expectations of the employee?
Yeah. That is a short question with a lot to unpack there. So I think in your brief introduction, you already mentioned, right, that ultimately what we want is for an organization to achieve its overall strategic priorities. And for that, we identify some of the key goals and priorities and try to cascade that down.
Yes.
Now, rather than just cascading it as is, which I think often happens in organizations, it's very important that we, let's say, translate. So if we have, let's call them CEO or enterprise priorities, how does that translate and cascade down into the organization? So we obviously start at the highest level. We then want to look at what does that mean for the various functions to achieve, for the various teams to achieve, and then ultimately, what does that mean for the individuals? So I like the method of OKRs, objectives and key results. But I think it's very key also for the listeners to understand that ultimately there are very good systems and ways of doing things.
Sure.
But if you don't apply the system well, because in the end it's just a framework, it's not going to work. So what does a team need to achieve? What does an individual need to achieve to contribute to these enterprise-wide goals? So a few pitfalls or a few things to keep in mind here. Too often, I think you see organizations having too many goals, too many objectives.
Yes.
So that means that there is no focus. So I like to talk about, signal versus noise. So we need to make sure that we keep the signal strong. So 3 to 5 key priorities
Yes.
is probably the max. Then you mentioned SMART earlier, which I love. We always talk about SMART, but again, it's just a framework. So you can have a very smart goal that doesn't achieve or contribute to any of the key enterprise goals, right? So you can have a very smart goal about how you're going to operate a copying machine and make 20 copies, but if it's not going to improve your sales, it might be a smart goal. So in the end, it's not just a framework, it is how you apply it and how you link each and everyone's contributions to the overall enterprise goals.
Sure. I think that's great, Vincent. I think you summed it up quite nicely. So that's the easier part, or let's say, the objective part, which is quantifiable and therefore easier to identify and ink down on paper, in terms of key accountability areas and related key performance indicators and so forth. Now that's the what's and what to achieve in the goals, in the roles, excuse me. But how about the hows, which is the next question? That is, what is the best way to determine the behavioral expectations, or skill sets, let's say, to ensure that the right competencies and skills are identified for achieving success in the role? A second part of this question could also be, and how do they relate to the organizational core values and cultural expectations?
Yes. I personally, but that could also be because I often see organizations focus too much on the what and too little on the how. So for me, the how is arguably more important. And I know that's a bit of a blunt statement, but very, very, very important compared to the what. So too often, and I think we all know, targets are being achieved, but there is a whole trail of devastation that follows. So the how is very important. And then you mentioned behaviors, you mentioned competencies. many organizations still work with competency models, defining what a particular role and a person, what are the competencies that they need, job, families, all those things. Me personally, I am very happy to see a shift happening from competencies to skills and tasks. So for some of the audience, they might be aware of Josh Bersin, for example. He talks a lot about that. So I think, again, competencies well defined and applied can be very effective, but often they are not understood by the business and they tend to become more of a HR tool because that's how we link it with learning or even reward, etc.
Sure.
Skills, I think, are more understandable. So I would like to make a shift from competency models to skills definition. What are the skills necessary? And also to shift from just focusing on the role more towards what does this role need to achieve? What are the skills needed? And also within the context of the contributions that they need to make. So and then you mentioned behavior, so values, for example, very important.
Yeah.
Values, I love values that are described more with verbs than with statements, because then it is more easy to understand what I need to do rather than, be customer focused.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Just a
the
related,
how.
just a related remark, if I may, with what you just said.
Yeah.
Could the ratio between the what's and the how's in terms of the performance appraisal, for a multinational like Coke, it may be 50-50, right? But if we're talking about another organization, let's say, that has more of a performance-oriented culture and a focus on objectives alone, do you think is it fair to set objectives at 70%, let's say, versus 30% on the skills or the hows, the behavior required to get there?
Yeah. So again, interesting question. So if I look at the three companies where I worked, so IBM, Coca-Cola, Cleveland. IBM at the time I was there, as well as Coca-Cola, they had a 50-50 ratio between the what and the how. In Cleveland, there was if I'm not mistaken, a 60-40. So 60% on the what, 40% on the how. Yeah, I find it difficult to answer. I do think that there needs to be some ratio because what gets measured gets done. So I definitely would support having at least 40%.
Yeah.
Personally, I would prefer 50-50 on the how. But there's a lot of nuance to that statement,
Sure.
which I don't know if we have time for that. But I
Yes.
do think there needs to be a balance between the two.
Certainly. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I've had clients where they would like to, organization would start off first year in a system like this, transparent. They keep the objective part heavy just to make sure that they don't deviate from their core objectives or performance. On the other hand, in the subsequent performance cycle or the year after, when they know that things are more streamlined and running smooth and performance is not an issue, at least on the objective side, they tend to then bring in more of the skills and competencies. So yeah, that's just my experience. Next question, if
Mm.
I may. So that's regarding in performance evaluations or appraisal exercise. Let's just talk about the exercise. Do you think it is fair for line managers to use a standard deviation or bell curve, as we call it? Something that, of course, the father of that, I always say Jack Welch from General Electric, who set the
Mm.
global standards
Yeah.
on it and ran it very effectively. Do you think this forced ranking method to assess individual performance is fair?
I think what is fair is we need. So I think what I want to do is, if I may, I want to reframe it and moving away from bell curve or moving away from the method that we're using more towards what are we actually trying to achieve? And ultimately, a bell curve is just to get a discipline into the organization and the leaders, ultimately to differentiate contribution, to differentiate performance. And I think that is the key point here. So is the bell curve fair? Maybe, maybe not. In my personal experience, it has always created issues. But I think if you can move the discussion towards differentiation of performance and rewards, I think, and if you do that in a fair, transparent way, I think everybody can get on board with that. So I think I would prefer to move the conversation to how do you establish a leadership team that is capable of doing fair differentiation of performance. And if you want to use the bell curve, okay. If you want to use another method, because I've worked in organizations where we got rid of the bell curve as well.
Yes.
But ultimately, yes, performance need to be differentiated. Maybe not necessarily the bell curve.
All right. So for those companies, just taking your thought forward on the next question, for those companies not applying the comparative or force ranking performance assessment principles, what challenges does HR face in terms of rewarding the employees equitably? Because obviously there's a tendency to give self-appraisals high, and then the line managers also on that bandwagon. And before we know it, you have a line share of your population that is falling into the A player category. So what kind of challenges would HR face in terms of compensation and benefits and rewards in this case?
Yeah. So it's obviously a chain reaction, right? So if we manage to establish a solid, which means transparent and fair method of differentiating performance, we have a good calibration process to ensure we understand who the top performers are and the low performers. If that is all set up well, and I think moving to rewards, there's a couple of things I think that are important. One is, apart from the fair and transparent process, you need to have data collected throughout the year.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was
decisions.
asking the question from the perspective of finance or being a CFO or something.
Okay, yeah, so that's more budget related then, and how. So I'll give you an example that I had in Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola used to have the classical, standard approach with mid-year review, year-end review, and then there was a prescribed from HR. They said, well, if your performance rating is this, you get 6%. So that it was all prescribed and managed by HR. And then there was a transition, an evolution or a change, if you like, where HR let go of that control. And there's obviously a lot more to the story, but they created a method and a strong governance and process behind differentiation. And then ultimately, in order to manage the budget, managers were given a certain budget based on the size of their team, and the managers were given the freedom to assign based on their view, whether it was merit or even bonus. So the manager was given the freedom to that. So from a financial perspective, it was managed within the budget, but there was a lot more leeway given to the managers. And of course, that needs to come with education, capability, and maturity, but that can be, managed. So from a financial perspective, I think as long as you stick within certain budgets, it doesn't have to be super rigid from an HR perspective, and you can still find within boundaries set to give the freedom and the flexibility to leaders who usually have more insight into how people have performed. And then, HR can provide comp ratio or can provide where people sit in their salary scale or the complexity of the role. That could be a measure for that. So there could be some data that is given, talent label, talent rating, but the managers within that budget can manage that.
Great. Thank you. Yes, that's a good point you raised. Um, let's head towards like some closing remarks or maybe some final thoughts. If you allow me, I would like to, just say that from my perspective, obviously we're talking about taking a rather, perhaps what might be a subjective thing and bringing it into a more objective perspective. If we were to broadly define performance management, and you mentioned during the conversation that, of course, as the HR evolves in different organizations, so does their performance management platform and their understanding of what to measure and how to measure accurately. But at the end of it, regardless of all the systems and procedures that we bring in, or like the McKinsey 9 grid, or you could take any global platform, employees still, I mean, in my experience of 30 years, they will have their disagreements with their line managers and department heads on their final score. So my question would be, how do we, or how does HR, try to keep the engagement level up on a comparative basis? Because at the end of the day, of course, the rainmakers or people in those key positions which are impacting the bottom line would get rewarded higher than those who are not, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think one of the, or maybe a few of the key factors in all of this, like you said, if you have an organization with 1,000 people, you will never be able to please everybody. There's always going to be something. Yes. But what you can do is do it as best as you can. So I think there's a few. So one is the leaders, the managers play a key role in this. So obviously they are there to set the expectation, to coach the people, to manage any problems or to support. So I think the leaders play a vital role in that. Sure. So I think ultimately, of course, there are systems that are better. There is strong governance needed, all of that. But I think ultimately the framework that you create, as long as it's well structured, well set up, if it is a little bit left, a little bit right, it's fine. Ultimately, what matters is how well and how clearly are goals and expectations set, how capable and equipped and enabled are the managers and the leaders to engage the teams, to coach the teams, to manage expectations, and then also how much are you sharing in the organization to create transparency and clarity about how performance is being addressed, how the process works, and also what are the positive or negative consequences from a certain level of performance. So I always say it's not so much about performance management as a system, as a frame, it's about managing performance. So it's about how the leaders create psychological safety, how they set expectations. So I think that is very, very key in addressing or preventing some of these problems.
Great. I think, Vincent, you really touched upon some very interesting, thought-provoking ideas about something that is a very basic yet a very complex area of HR management. I'd like to actually thank you very much for your time today. We're sort of running out of the time for the webinar. But I'm sure that our viewers can get a lot of insights from this discussion about performance management and how it relates to rewards and ultimately engagement. So we hope that you can join us again on a future webinar. And I would like to thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have a good day. Thank you.